This is a performative kind of allegory of the neighbor. What's happening here is kind of theatre. There's this house which is almost just gotten over the fantasy of itself being a vehicle, and then there's this car which is still in the throes of the fantasy of being a house. The one that's moving rather slowly across the space is actually the static mobile home, while the one that you normally expect to be mobile is kind of static and is in a rather more of a stalking mode. Love and fear meet in the neighbor. The neighbor being your friend, because the neighbor is the one who's outside of the system. The question of neighboring in networks, in the so-called democracy of infrastructures, of how systems are designed to be kind of supplying knowledge, supplying data, how they in fact behave in rather more complex ways. And so the idea of not looking at any kind of system as a closed off, as a unit of, as a container, but as something that is porous. The various types of habitats that people can occupy, and how they are related to the question of networks that I've been talking about, which of course comes from gypsy caravans and all this other kind of tradition, which has nothing to do with elite forms of holiday making in a way, right? So there are all these kind of crossovers, and in effect kind of neighborhoods between all these kinds of different people who are all in some sense escaping from traditional kind of regimes of having your plot and a property situation. Is the idea of being able to inhabit and expand upon some of the kind of grey territories in legal language, which is also apparent in this whole question of the mobile house in a way. I was interested also in this idea of it being a fairly formal thing as well. The form of this late 1970s static mobile home, which is itself a kind of a contradiction, which emerged from certain idea of the caravan somehow being frozen, of people not having, people having the idea that you don't have to drag your house around all over the country. Well, essentially they are both walk-in kind of environments. They are also in certain sense found objects. They're the original, mostly the original, they're pretty much what they looked like 25 years ago. You can walk into them, you can see the various ways in which people would, you can imagine kind of inhabitation of these spaces. Society did not like these things, in general wanted not to have them in their neighborhood because of real estate, property values going down and so on and so forth. But there is an explosion at the moment of contemporary forms of the mobile home. Because the neighbor, as a theological thing, from the idea, from the biblical kind of injunction to love thy neighbor as thyself, and the contradiction of, if you love your neighbor, does that mean you love universally? Is it a question of loving a specific neighbor? Considering the question of privacy, the nature of what is called safe distance, what is an ideal kind of insulation between members of the community, how do we perceive that distance, how does electronic networks intervene into that space, what does privacy mean now in these questions, what is the opportunity of the neighbor. It's kind of this thing that's trapped in the basement, even though it's a large basement, it's this thing that's kind of moving back and forth, not going anywhere. It's the story of the static mobile